9. Richard Paul Warner. It's sometimes difficult to blame a civilian for taking the law into their own hands, especially when it involves retribution against someone who committed a horrific crime. But this doesn't make it any less illegal, and going after someone over something that should be handled in court can come with serious consequences. A 42-year-old Australian man named Richard Paul Warner learned this lesson the hard way in 2017, when he was accused of setting up stings against offenders in Adelaide with histories of committing assaults against vulnerable victims. Posing as a potential target online, he lured convicted creeps into situations that gave him the opportunity to expose their faces and identities, which is illegal to do in Australia. Warner filmed his self-styled pursuit of justice and posted the videos on YouTube. And in all fairness, the offenders took the bait, which suggests that they were attempting to do things that would have certainly qualified as illegal. In at least one instance, one of the individuals Warner targeted was charged for their alleged crimes. But Warner also broke the law, and nabbing a few bad guys wasn't going to get him off the hook for it. Prosecutors dropped an assault charge in exchange for his guilty plea to a reduced count, and he was spared from prison time. The judge imposed a 12-month good behavior bond, which meant that he was expected to stay out of trouble and follow any rules set forth by the court regarding supervision, counseling, and any other required programs. While leaving the courthouse, Warner told reporters that it was up to the public to decide whether his actions were worth the legal trouble that they came with. 8. Vigilante women pursue car that wasn't stolen. A pair of women in Spokane County, Washington, landed themselves in an embarrassing predicament when they decided to pursue a car that they thought was stolen one day in July of 2023. After spotting the suspected stolen vehicle in a driveway, the ladies got into a car together and drove to the residence. They blocked the vehicle in with their Subaru, where a woman sitting in the passenger seat quickly slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. Determined to hold the alleged thief responsible, one of the vigilante women rushed out of the passenger side of the Subaru and over to the allegedly stolen vehicle. She threw herself onto the hood of the car with a baseball bat in hand, only to fall off and be run over by her friend who was behind the wheel of the Subaru. The woman in the supposedly stolen vehicle fled the scene, and the lady who got run over was taken to the hospital in stable condition. Police soon discovered that the vehicle the women were pursuing wasn't stolen after all. No criminal charges were pressed against anyone involved, but police used the incident as a cautionary tale about why it's a bad idea for members of the public to take the law into their own hands. 7. Jennifer Nelson. It's understandable for a parent to go into protective mode when their teen gets bullied. But a 35-year-old mom from Long Island, New York, named Jennifer Nelson, took it to a whole new level after her son was robbed by his peers in October 2022. She tracked down a group of individuals who she believed were involved and allegedly threatened them with a knife outside a Dunkin' Donuts cafe in Mastic Beach. During the confrontation, a young man who was with the group walked away from the situation and went to a Manhattan Bagel parking lot across the street. According to police, Nelson sped after him and hit him head-on with her SUV outside the business. The impact knocked the victim onto the ground, and Nelson proceeded to run him over before throwing the vehicle into reverse, backing up, and mowing him down a second time. She then fled the scene and traded her SUV in for a different vehicle before her lease was up, which prosecutors later described as an attempt to evade law enforcement. But if that was truly Nelson's intention, it didn't work for very long. She was arrested the next day and was later indicted on charges of first-degree assault, reckless endangerment, 9 counts of attempted second-degree murder, and leaving the scene of an accident without reporting, resulting in serious injury. The victim, who suffered multiple broken ribs and pelvis fractures, was reportedly targeted in a case of mistaken identity. Prosecutors argued that Nelson's decision to run over the man a second time proved intent. But Nelson claimed at a trial that she didn't realize she'd run the victim over. In the end, a jury acquitted her of the attempted murder and assault charges. but she was found guilty of leaving the scene of an accident. And while it still makes her a convicted felon, she now only faces 1 to 4 years in prison rather than up to 25 years. Nelson is scheduled to be sentenced in December of 2023. 6. Neighborly dispute turns deadly. 35-year-old Ajike, A.J. Owens, didn't get along with her neighbor, 58-year-old Susan Lawrence, who allegedly complained about her kids playing outside. The two Ocala, Florida residents were entangled in a long-standing dispute when their latest run-in with one another turned deadly during the summer of 2023. According to law enforcement, Owens went over to Lawrence's home to confront her one afternoon after one of her children accused the neighbor of throwing a pair of skates at them. What began as a verbal altercation between the two women escalated into physical violence when Lawrence fatally shot Owens through the door of her home. Lawrence claimed that she fired in self-defense, but authorities were unwilling to accept her story at face value. After concluding that there wasn't enough evidence to pursue a murder case, prosecutors charged her with manslaughter. Records showed that law enforcement had responded to calls about problems between Lawrence and Owens as far back as 2021. Between February 2022 and April 2023, Lawrence called police at least 7 times to complain about neighborhood children. And by the time the deadly shooting occurred 3 months later, the women already knew that they couldn't get along. It's extremely unfortunate that Lawrence chose to resort to using her gun instead of doing what she'd done in the past and calling the cops. Unfortunately, the outcome of the case remains to be seen. 5. Cory Bowen. Good Samaritans sprang into action the moment they heard someone screaming for help from a roadside in Miami one evening in October 2018. They found a man unconscious and bleeding on a sidewalk as his panicked family stood nearby, not quite knowing how to handle the situation. The victim had been struck by a hit-and-run driver who fled the scene in a white Toyota sedan. While others tended to the victim and called for an ambulance, Sean Alarcon chased after the suspect, who was later identified as 24-year-old Jose Esteban Contreras. Alarcon was joined by a skateboarder named Cory Bowen, who not only had his cell phone camera rolling, he was ready to pounce into action the moment he caught up with the driver. Bowen ordered Contreras to turn his car off and exit the vehicle. But when it became clear that the suspect had no plans to comply, Bowen smashed the driver's side window out with his skateboard and yanked the keys out of the ignition. He and Alarcon pulled Contreras out of the vehicle, then pinned him to the ground and held him there until police arrived. While the actions of the brave bystanders who chased after Contreras are admirable, police agencies generally advise civilians not to get that involved when it comes to apprehending suspects. In most cases, onlookers are advised to keep a safe distance, dial 911, and let law enforcement handle the rest. Thankfully, though, the victim of the hit-and-run survived, and Contreras was sentenced to prison time for the crime. 4. Kyle Braidwood. Army Specialist Job Irving and his roommates celebrated his 30th birthday with a dad-themed outing in Tacoma, Washington in 2021. Wearing tucked-in polo shirts, khaki shorts, socks with sandals, and other stereotypically dad-like ensembles, the group went out drinking and eventually ended up at a gas station. They then apparently decided to stay and hang out for a while beneath the gas pumps. The clerk on duty that night, 31-year-old Kyle Braidwood, was far from entertained by the group's behavior. After the men pulled into the parking lot blaring music, they began dancing and tossing a ball around beneath the gas pumps. So Braidwood stepped outside and asked them to keep the noise down. Surveillance footage showed Irving approaching Braidwood while carrying a tape measure, apparently one of the accessories for his dad outfit, and extending it as if he were about to measure the employee. Braidwood swiftly threw Irving to the ground, and the men got into a brief struggle before Irving and his friends left to go to another bar. In the meantime, Braidwood called 911 and said that he'd feared for his safety during the altercation. Irving then showed back up at the gas station and made a 911 call of his own. He had a head injury from the fight with Braidwood and wanted to give law enforcement his side of the story. But as the minutes passed, no officers responded to the scene. Braidwood called the police again, and so did the store's owner. But roughly an hour went by with no cops arriving at the gas station. When closing time rolled around at midnight, Braidwood attempted to physically remove Irving from the store. The men wrestled on the pavement for nearly 45 seconds before Braidwood pulled his gun and fatally shot Irving. He told police he was acting in self-defense and wasn't charged with any crimes. But he's currently being sued by Irving's family, who are still hoping for criminal charges to be brought against him. 3. George Spence. In a shocking act of violence that occurred in the Scottish town of Cambuslang in October 2022, 48-year-old George Spence attacked another man with a hammer at a takeout restaurant, leaving him permanently disfigured. The confrontation began as soon as Spence and his son, 23-year-old George Jr., pulled into the restaurant's parking lot. A disagreement then erupted between 24-year-old Jack O'Neill and George Jr. after their cars nearly bumped into one another earlier that day. George Sr. would later claim that O'Neill was threatening his son. The father then used a hammer to assault O'Neill, striking him with the tool at least 7 times before making a hasty exit from the scene. George Jr. yelled at his dad to get back in the car as O'Neill attempted to run from his attacker and hide behind a counter for safety. He reportedly would have died without surgery and will be on medication for the rest of his life due to the lasting injuries from the attack. The victim also now suffers from a proneness to head and chest infections. Prosecutors described the attack as completely unprovoked and unjustified. They refused to chalk it up to being the result of George Sr.'s protective fatherly instinct kicking in. And in the end, the judge took an equally firm stance, sentencing George Sr. to 3 years and 10 months in prison. 2. Donald Keith Forbis. On what began as a normal afternoon in April 2023, deputies in Jackson County, North Carolina were called to a residence in Bakers Creek Township, where 39-year-old Donald Keith Forbis was allegedly holding 2 individuals against their will. According to law enforcement, Forbis had detained 2 young men after finding them on his property. He was accused of firing multiple rounds into a pickup truck being driven by the victims. It's also believed that he took his captives to an RV park, where he allegedly moved them to various locations before being found by the police. Forbis was charged with a laundry list of serious crimes, including 2 felony counts of second-degree kidnapping, 3 felony counts of discharging a weapon into occupied property, and 2 misdemeanor counts each of assault by pointing a gun and assault with a deadly weapon. He bonded out of jail and was freed pending the outcome of the case. This and other incidents that occurred around the same time prompted the seemingly exasperated sheriff, Doug Farmer, to remind the public that taking the law into their own hands is always a bad idea. He also urged locals to educate themselves on use of force laws so that people would hopefully gain a better understanding of what they can and can't legally do when it comes to protecting their property. 1. Vehicle theft ends in Texas-style shootout. After noticing that his vehicle was missing from the parking lot of a San Antonio mall one afternoon in July of 2023, the owner tracked his missing ride to a nearby fitness center. A man, later identified as 34-year-old Kevin Eric Garcia, was behind the wheel, and there was a woman in the passenger seat. The vehicle's owner attempted to take back his wheels without waiting for any help from law enforcement by ordering the alleged thieves to exit the vehicle at gunpoint. Garcia then shot the man, who returned fire, killing the accused thief and critically injuring the female passenger. Luckily, though, both the woman and the car owner survived their injuries. Former District Attorney Nico LaHood told local station KENS5 that the shooting appeared to be justified. Texas has generous laws to begin with when it comes to justified shootings, and Garcia's decision to fire at the owner of the stolen vehicle gave him the right to defend himself with deadly force. Garcia's brother, Jose, disagreed with the car owner's actions, arguing that a vehicle is never worth the loss of a human life. He went on to say that the man who shot his brother was a vigilante, not a hero, regardless of whether his brother's actions were in the wrong. In Jose's opinion, the shooter took the law into his own hands in a situation where he should have just called on law enforcement for help. When the story first broke, the case was under investigation, but no criminal charges appeared to have been filed against any of the parties involved. People have a lot of different reasons for trying to take the law into their own hands. Sometimes their emotions get the best of them, while others are dissatisfied with law enforcement's response to a situation. But a person's decision to handle things on their own terms often comes with regret, because it doesn't take much for vigilante justice to backfire. Have you ever been tempted to take the law into your own hands? And if so, why? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.